Well, if tonight's game's anything like last night's game one of the conference finals, this should be a hell of a week and a half here in both series as we await the Dallas Mavericks taking on the Minnesota Timberwolves here tonight. And if you had overtime last night on your bingo card for Boston and Indiana, well, congratulations to you. I thought the first half total going over was bingo enough for me. Steve Merril in the house, double R, 1L here. And no kidding, Merril. If we can get this Dallas-Minnesota series to equal what we just saw last night, hell, I don't even know what the hell we're going to get for the finals, but this is going to be some quality basketball we got in store for us.
Yeah, I mean, especially if Indiana remains competitive like they have the last three games of the playoffs. You know, they were down. Don't forget, they were a 30-point loss in Game 5 to the Knicks, and it wasn't looking too good. And they had to win Game 6 at home, which they did as a favorite. And then they pulled the upset in Game 7 and set an NBA record, 67% shooting. It was over 70% at one point. That was the best shooting percentage in the history of the NBA playoffs in any game. And then they traveled third different city in 5 nights, and they carried it over. Good for them. I do think one of the best bets I've seen recently, though, was when the overtime started. You could get the Celtics in game at -1.5, and they actually got down 3 in the overtime. Nobody scored the first minute, but I just had a feeling once that game went to OT with that miraculous corner 3 that it was the Celtics to lose, and they ended up winning by 5. Of course, they're up by almost 7 in the overtime. That was a pretty good bet, though. Boston -1.5 in OT.
It was exactly what we've been talking about all playoff long, Merrill, with some of these in-game opportunities, because when they were down, I think it was 5 or something in the final 2 minutes there, they were actually plus money. For that brief window, you had them at plus money when it just looked like, oh boy, I've seen this before with Boston, but they ended up pulling it out, and I can't wait to see what the adjustments have in store for them in a game 2 coming up tomorrow. But tonight, game 1, Mavericks, Minnesota Timberwolves here, hovering around the 4.5. It's been bouncing back and forth. The total has gone up. It's gone down. I think I'm seeing 207 right around now, Steve. That's what we're looking at here. So start with the line movement here. What have you seen from this? Is the public on Minnesota, you think? Who's betting what right now, do you think the market's telling us?
Yeah, I think it's a little combination of both. When I did the standalone video yesterday for this morning, I mentioned that the early sharp money was on Minnesota and the over in this Dallas-Minnesota game. We saw it open 206.5, was up to 207.5. The public has been leaning over pretty much every playoff game. That's just their default lean in general. But we have seen some buyback back down to 207 now as of Wednesday afternoon, a few hours before tip-off. Game itself opened 3.5, was bet up to 4.5 yesterday already. The public is leaning towards Minnesota, in my opinion, and we've also have a little bit of sharp money there. So I think it was a combination of both. I think the sharps and the public are both on Minnesota and the over. But we have seen a little bit of buyback here on the under, so maybe it was just a hedge move. Maybe the sharps like Minnesota more than the total itself.
Yeah, it's an interesting setup here, and I think it's also interesting, Merrill, that we've had, listen, Minnesota, over the last year and a half, their entire focus was beating the Denver Nuggets. They hired their general manager. They basically built the roster, put it away to beat Denver. Well, okay, I mean, you finally beat them, but now what, Merrill? Because this isn't Denver. Denver didn't have any depth. Denver had its own set of issues. What does this matchup say to you here with Minnesota and Dallas? I don't like the spot for Minnesota in game 1. Coming off of that, you spent the last year and a half saying we got to beat Denver. We got to beat Denver. I don't generally like those kinds of teams after a game 7 in game 1. But how does this series match up for you?
Yeah, it's a very interesting point because I mentioned this in my video as well. And comment below here on the show, live chat. Let us know your thoughts here. I mean, was that the end of the Denver Nuggets maybe? To blow a 20-point lead at home in Game 7 as the defending world champs, I thought was very surprising. They lost 3 of the 4 home games to Minnesota. So 2 ways to look at it. that could be the beginning of the end for the Denver Nuggets. The Atlanta Falcons never recovered from blowing that 28-3 lead against the Patriots in the Super Bowl. They kind of went downhill after it. Now, Denver should be good next year. They got everybody back. Jokic is still in his prime. Jamal Murray, if he stays healthy, that could be the big X factor. He seems to get hurt. But like you said, Joe, also maybe I'm overreacting to the Nuggets. Maybe it was just a bad matchup because you're right. Minnesota really was built to beat the Nuggets, and they barely did it still. And also keep in mind when the officials let them play the way they wanted, more of a football style, is when Denver struggled at home. Denver did shoot over 54%, 3 straight wins on games 3, 4, and 5 against the quote-unquote best defense in the league and the defensive player of the year in Gobert. So 2 ways to look at it. I wouldn't be shocked to see the Nuggets regress next year, but maybe it was just a good matchup for Minnesota. If that's the case, that might be bad news against the Mavericks. OKC, they were fortunate to face OKC, a very talented but young team. They avoided Denver, and now they get to face the other young team. And now, obviously, Minnesota got by the champs, so the experience maybe wasn't an issue. But then again, if it was a matchup edge, this is setting up pretty well for Dallas, having played 2 of the youngest teams here on their way to the finals. And the other thing we'll talk about more here on the show, but I definitely want to point out, be careful with the 4 regular season meetings. They played twice in December, twice in January. This is not the same Dallas Mavericks. They made the big trade early February. They got Gafford, and of course they got PJ Washington, who's just been fantastic the last month or so in the playoffs. So 2 of these starters were not here the 4 times they played. And then to complicate it more, Kyrie Irving missed 3 of the 4 matchups. Doncic and Irving only played together once in the 4 regular season meetings, and they didn't have either Gafford or Washington on the roster yet. So it's really interesting to see how different this Denver team, or this Dallas team is rather. And they finished 21-9 down the stretch after the trade. The last 2 regular season games were meaningless. They were 21-7 otherwise, 75% straight up with this current lineup.
So shout out here at the chat room in rare form already. Darren in the house here, already looking at Nas Reed props here. We'll dive into some props coming up. John Divided Don't Hide It Finley back in the house, talking about how Indy gave that game away. Absolutely correct. But there are a few more games there that I think that series will be a lot more interesting now than it was if they would have lost by 20. I'll tell you that. Who else have we got? Eric D in the house. A Life in Vegas is here. Kelsey in the house in YouTube Shorts. Loose 72. Not what I was saying with Minnesota not built to beat Dallas. They were built, and the whole roster was constructed over the last 2 years because they knew they had to get past Denver. Not saying they can't beat Dallas. I'm just saying for a young team without a lot of experience of any success, you spend the entire year, Merril, going, we got to beat Denver. We got to beat the champs. We got to beat them. Well, you beat them. You still got one more team to go here, though, in Dallas. And I still took the over 5.5 games in the series. I still think this is one that is probably going 6 or 7 games here. And then the question to me is, what does the winner of this series have left in the finals, Merril? Because each is going to get a pound of their flesh here, I think, in this one.
Right, and that's why it really looked like it was setting up well for Boston. But had they lost last night, maybe Indiana had a chance. I'd said Boston in 5. I think Indiana probably still gets a game. What I thought was more likely was a Boston blowout last night, and then we've seen Boston lose game 2 in both series so far. That might not be as likely now that they'll be more focused. But Indiana probably gets one of the 2 home games, in my opinion, and then Boston closes it out on their home court in game 5. So they're going to be well rested. I like your over 5.5 in this series. I do think it's a toss-up. I really could see it going either way. Minnesota currently minus 180 series price, Dallas plus 160. I'm neutral on the series itself, but I sure wouldn't want to lay minus 180 in what I think is a toss-up series. So I guess the value is with Dallas, but I like where you're going better. Instead of trying to predict the winner, let's just say if it's a competitive series, it should go 6 or 7. So over 5.5 total games makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just go out there and say it, guys. Dallas is winning one of these games in Minnesota. So they're going back to Dallas 1-1. So the question is, do you think Dallas is winning tonight, or is Dallas going to win tomorrow? Because, Merril, quite honestly, I don't know any team better at actually winning games on the road in the playoffs right now than the Dallas Mavericks, who just seem to have this knack of, and they've won what? Not just, they've won outright the last 4 or 5 here on the road. Minnesota has not been a great favorites as of late. I believe 3-8 out of their last 11 as a favorite. And well, they can thank Denver for that, for beating them outright in Denver there a couple of times. But it does feel, I don't think this is going to go the way of Denver, where Dallas is going to win too. And, all of a sudden, or Minnesota is going to win too, and Dallas is going to struggle. I think this is zigzag all day long, right through 7 games, Merril. Is that how you seen it, or you think it's going to be one of these series where home court reigns true here?
No, I like the zigzag in this series. We always talk about the zigzag works better with quality teams, and these are both quality teams. And I think it's a very evenly matched series. So what I would like to see tonight, to be honest, is a blowout win by one team or the other, because then that sets up a pretty good bounce back probably on Friday in game 2. And I would agree with you. Dallas has a very good shot of splitting these 2 road games. So if Minnesota wins by double digits tonight, Dallas is even stronger in game 2. I would be surprised if that happens, though, for the reasons you're mentioning. Minnesota's the team coming off the 7-game series.
Yeah.
They also are coming off the altitude. Ralph Michaels, you and I talked about this a few weeks ago. And in general, he pointed out, I thought it was really interesting that all sports, you talk about kind of like some good breadth in the system and some, it's not just one sport or the other. All sports, playing after the Broncos, playing after the Nuggets, playing after the Rockies, even in baseball, teams struggle the next game out. And Minnesota would fit that situation. You're coming off a game 7 in altitude with just, a couple days rest. So I think it's a tough spot for him in that reason. And Dallas got it done in 6. And I go back to the fact also, Minnesota on the season is 6.5 games better than the Mavericks win-loss. But it's so misleading because Dallas finished 21-7 in meaningful games, and they're now, 8-4 in the playoffs.
Yep.
So that means they're 29-12. I'm sorry, 29-11. 29-11 straight up since early February, since that trade deadline in meaningful games. So they're as good as anybody in the NBA right now.
Yeah, no, it's interesting here tonight. I think this one's going to be a whole lot of fun, Merril. When you approach this game tonight, situationally, I would say advantage Dallas. But what does this game come down to you tonight here? Is this a matter of, is this going to be a defensive series? Is this going to be the stars have to win it? A lot has been made about the role players and how Dallas's role players were the ones that ended up beating OKC, not necessarily the Kyries and the Lukas of the world. I agree with that to a point, but what is this series going to come down to? We're in the Western Conference Finals. I think role players are nice, but ultimately your stars have to win this for you, don't they, at this point?
Yeah, I agree. And I think what's a big question mark for me is PJ Washington. Can he continue to have these monster games like he did in the last round against Oklahoma City? And Minnesota's had the best defensive efficiency all year, but OKC was a pretty good defensive efficiency team as well. And if you looked at the overall seasonal stats, that was the big mismatch in the last round. It was 2 top 10 offenses, but OKC was well ahead of Dallas. But once again, it's so misleading because Dallas, since picking up Gafford and Washington, have been a much better defensive team. In fact, just using the numbers, they picked them up 3 games before the All-Star break, but just for back-testing simplicity, I broke it down from first half to second half. First 55 games of the season before the All-Star break, Mavericks had a 116 defensive rating. The 27 games after, a 112. So that's a pretty big drop from one half to the next. Their pace slowed down about a possession or so a game. It didn't really slow down the pace, but the defense got a lot better. And if you look at the numbers with Washington on and off the court, we focused on those 3 straight 20-plus point games, the good shooting from off 3-point range. But his big difference has actually been defensively. They're about a point weaker without him on the court this season, but they're almost 7 points better defensively per 48 minutes with PJ Washington. And Gafford is even more of a defensive stopper. They're actually a little bit stronger offensively without him. So Dallas has become a better defensive team. But then again, Joe, this total has really been dropped. I mean, it opened 206.5. It's now 207. Regular season meetings were in the 220, 230 range. And, once again, not a lot to work with on those 4 meetings because they have the same lineups. But still, this is a pretty substantial drop from the regular season games.
Yeah, and styles, right? This is what it's all about here. We know the problem that I have with Minnesota and the totals in this series, Merril, is that the most inconsistent offense we have is with Minnesota. They are as streaky as hell. So what are you going to get from them? You know what I mean? On a night-to-night basis here. I mean, there's only so many double-digit comebacks that they are going to have an opportunity here, right? Where you have to dump them all in on the fourth quarter and hope the defense can hold up here. If both teams show up offensively here, it's great. It feels like an over, but I would much rather split these games in half and take my chances that Dallas is better early and Minnesota will have a pretty good idea in game as to whether or not this game 7, which history tells us usually takes its toll early on in the series here of these teams coming out of a game 7 and are a favorite in that game 1. It has not been a great track record for those favorites. But if that's going to be evident, I think it's going to be evident early, Merrill, where maybe the legs are tired and Dallas, well, they can get over 51.5 points in the first half because we have another situation where the first half total, Merrill, is higher than the full game or the second half, which is 101 right now, and it makes no sense.
Yeah, we talked about that last week in that one game. What was it? The Denver game, right? I think it was one of the Denver games. It was 5 points higher. It was 105 versus 100. It just made no sense to us. That was game 6, which turned out to be a rout, so it didn't matter. It went under by a ton because Denver only scored 70 points. But yeah, I still don't quite get the logic. I know it's all based on math. It's all based on the history of the NBA and these series and stuff, but you never see this in college basketball.
Nope.
In fact, college basketball, the first half is always about, only about 40% of the game total. And you're talking about like it would be like a 65 and then a 75 for the second half. It's a substantial difference. The NBA, it's not only 50-50, but like you're saying here again in this game, it's 207, it's 106 first half, 101 second half. And it should be a competitive game, which means there should be fouling down the stretch. When it's a 4.5 point spread, both teams should be within a few baskets down the stretch, theoretically. So I don't disagree, Joe. I think if you like the under, though, I'd say there's probably a little bit more value with the first half under just because I think it should be split. Whereas if you like the over, I'd rather the full game over for that reason.
Right.
We did see a fast start last night. Obviously, Indiana, road team off of game 7. Different situation because Minnesota's home now. But once again, I go back to the fact they played that game 7 in altitude. I think that's a little bit of an underrated factor that's not incorporated into the odds. And that probably just favors Dallas plus 4.5 if you really want to make it simple.
Yeah, and I think it favors Dallas in the first half, too, getting 2.5. I mean, don't forget, Minnesota has trailed in 7 of their 11 playoff games so far this season, Merrill. 7 of the 11 games they've trailed at the half, including 5 of 7 against Denver. And Denver, remember how we stuck a fork in them and said, oh, my goodness, L.A., the Lakers came out and smoked them in the first half every game, and they can't keep doing that. Well, they turned that around against Minnesota. But that doesn't escape the fact that Minnesota often starts slow and makes the necessary adjustments in the second half. Their rest advantage, right, for Dallas, doesn't that all lead to them being better early?
Perhaps, but then again, you could say maybe the home crowd gets Minnesota focused. That's why I think it's a little different. Whereas Indiana last night was on the road for game 1. Minnesota's back at home. And don't forget, the Celtics were up quickly. What was it, 13-0, 12 or 13-0 last night?
12,
But then Minnesota was up by the end of the first quarter, early first half. So it's tricky. I don't see a huge edge here in the first half versus full game. I do think it's interesting, though, that Dallas is 4.5 for the game. But like you said, first half, they're 2.5. So they're saying second half is only 2. Once again, I guess they had to put either 2 or 2.5. You can't put 2.25 would be the true number.
Right.
But yeah, there's probably a little bit of extra value with Dallas first half just because of that half point.
Yeah, it's interesting here to say it at least because Dallas obviously with the rest advantage here. Now, does that help? Does that help me make a few decisions in the prop market there, Merrill, tonight in this game here? Listen. For all the talk about Luka being hurt and all of this, he dropped 31 and 29 in the last 2 games against OKC. So if that's hurt, what the hell happens if he's healthy, Merrill? Because they didn't seem to. All we kept hearing, too, that entire series was Luka was hurt. Lou Dort's got him, everyone's got him under control. 28.5 points is what we've got here tonight, Merrill, for Luka. Feels like the extra day's rest there should do him well, but I don't know. Is it that much different, the people guarding Luka in this one, than what OKC had? Younger, more athletic? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, it's hard to really judge much of the regular season because he only played 2 of the 4 meetings, and only in one of those 2 times that he played did Kyrie Irving play with him. And once again, Gafford and Washington weren't on the team yet for any of the regular season games. But as a steady rule fast for me is I never look to fade these superstars, especially in focus spots. He's rested. It's game 1, like you said. He should be good to go. The points, he has had trouble getting there at times, but if you want a good hedge, there's the point and assist prop, but if his points don't get there, that's probably not going to get there either. But the rebounds and assists often get there when he underperforms points wise. For example, in a game number 4 against OKC, he had only 18 points, and in game 3, he had only 22 points. That would have stayed under the 28.5. But if you look at his assists and rebounds, he's still out there making a big difference. He had 20 and 22 combined points and rebounds, and there was around 18.5 was the total. So my point is, when he didn't get over the points the 2 times, his rebound assist combo got over. So I would play them both. I think at worst you split out, but if he gets a triple double, which is always a possibility, you could cash them both. So I like Luka points over, and I like rebound assist over as a hedge, and I can easily cash both of them still.
Oh, all right. I like that. PRA too, 45.5 there for Luka in this game here tonight, which feels about right. I guess maybe the big question is PJ Washington, right? What are we going to do with PJ here? Because he was absolutely lights out. And I thought this was an interesting one, Merril. How about his over 2.5 point, 2.5 made threes rather in the game? They're not going to call the dogs off. They are going to allow him to keep shooting until, of course, he's bricking them up left and right. But if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Now, I will say, obviously, Minnesota much better defense perimeter-wise against the 3 than what OKC was. But 2.5 threes here for a guy that's going to have his opportunities, not a bad look. What do you think we're going to get from PJ Washington in the series?
Yeah, so he's a guy that obviously vastly overperformed, as you mentioned, in that last round against Oklahoma City. And he had the 3 straight games. After only 10 points in game 1, he had 29, 27, and 21 in games 2, 3, and 4. And then, as is often the case, you got to start making adjustments. And they did somewhat limit him to just 10 and 9 points. But as I mentioned in my videos last week, we talked about it here on the show as well. You can't stop everybody. And they're always going to have to look to stop Irving and Doncic. So that's why PJ went off for 3 straight games, because he was still the 3rd option. Well, it becomes almost impossible to stop a 4th option. So when you start to try to stop the 3rd guy, someone else benefits, and that was Derrick Jones Jr. He entered my radar after going 1 for 10 in game 3 with just 3 points. And he was getting enough shot attempts to get up and over his, very modest total of about 8.5 points. And he did that in game 4. He had 17 in game 4 of that series. PJ Washington had 21. So you knew they had to stop one of those guys going into game 5 and 6. And they chose to stop Washington. Jones had 19 and 22. He got even stronger those last 3 games. Now, 2 ways to look at this. Maybe Jones will be on the Minnesota Timberwolves radar now, not Washington. But my guess is they can only stop one of the 2. So why not play them both? Once again, kind of like that last one with Doncic. Let's play Jones Jr. over 8.5 points. Let's play PJ Washington over 11.5 to 12 points. I think at worst we go 1-1. If it's a high-scoring game, which I think it could be, we could still go 2-0. So I'm not going to try to guess who's going to be the 4th option. I think either Washington or Jones benefits if they shut the other one down, and they both could still get over very modest point totals.
Yeah, I think we've talked about it before, Merril, here on the show. A good rule of thumb is we try not to fade superstars in spots like this. So, Edwards going to get his, guys. Let's be realistic here. The Doncics of the world, they're going to get his. I find some of these other guys interesting here, including, and I know James Murphy in the chat, and shout out to Big Daddy and company, also grind at all times on Instagram with a couple of mimosas in hand, hanging out here on a Wednesday. Congratulations there. Appreciate you here. But James Murphy rather says, what about Cat? What do we do with him? Oh, he's saying what? Over 20.5. I am seeing, 19.5, 20.5 here. It does seem like he's getting some love points-wise in the marketplace here tonight. What do we do with Karl Anthony Towns here?
Well, for the season, he averages about 21.5 a game, but so far in the playoffs, in the 11 playoff games with Minnesota, he's averaged about 19. So he's actually stayed under this. But I would have no problem with Karl Anthony Towns over. and Jaden McDaniels over. Once again, I'm not going to fade Edwards, but you do have to figure they're going to look to stop him. So if they do somewhat limit him or focus on him, that opens up the second and third scoring options, which are Karl Anthony Towns and Jaden McDaniels. So I would lean Anthony Towns over 19.5. He had 23 in 2 of his last 3 games. But I actually like Jaden McDaniels over as well, over at 10.5 points. And I go back to those regular season games. I said Dallas didn't have their current lineup, but Minnesota had all their guys in all 4 games. That's why they won 3 of the 4, because they had everyone playing, all the big guys. Nobody missed. And if you look at that one meeting against both Doncic and Irving, the one serious regular season game back in mid-January, McDaniels had only 2 points, but he was 1 for 10 shooting, 0 for 5 from 3, played 37 minutes. I don't think he's going to be on their radar tonight because of that, but he got plenty of shot attempts to get up and over 10.5. And he had 23 and 21 the last 2 games against Denver. He had 10 or more in 4 of the last 5 of the playoffs. And he had 9 in the other one. So he's hovering around this number. I think he can get up and over 10.5 tonight, Jaden McDaniels.
Oh, like a McDaniels here tonight. There is kind of a split room with Cat here tonight. Some people looking to fade him, at least in game 1. Some folks looking to back him here. And it looks like, if I'm not mistaken, Rudy Gobert is getting a little bit of love here, rebound-wise. We saw Gobert, I believe, both points and rebounds, I believe, were 12.5. 12.5 boards here tonight. Now, we're talking about 2 of the top 10 tallest teams in the NBA, I believe, is the way they rated out there, Merril. So both of these teams certainly enjoy quality defense. Both like to crash the boards. Both can throw some bodies. We know Gafford. We know Washington, the addition there. And also, I don't want to say anything, but the rumor is, or at least the reports are, that Kleber could very well be back in one of these games before it's all said and done. That's even, that's more height, more rebounding, and more importantly, more three-point shooting for Dallas. So who owns the boards, do you think, in this series here, Merril?
Yeah, Gobert's a little pricey on the rebound prop. It's at 12.5. His season average was actually a little bit over 12.5. But if you look at what he's done in the playoffs, and this is per game. I know he missed a game, but it's still per game. He's less than 11 rebounds a game in the postseason, and that's because he's been inconsistent. He had a couple 14s, but then he had a 9 and 11 and 4 on every other side of those. So he's only gone over 11 rebounds twice in the last 5 playoff games, and he got 13 in the other one. So 14's been his max, but he's been as low as like 9-ish. So I think 12.5 is pretty much where it should be. You could look at his points and rebounds over if you wanted to do something with him, as he's averaging over 12 points a game in the postseason, and he's been pretty efficient shooting-wise. But I don't know. I lost a little bit of respect for him as the defensive player of the year when Jokic was just schooling him for 40 points a game there in those 3 middle games. And I still think this Minnesota defense might not be as dominant as everybody thinks. And Dallas is so spread out. They have so many options now, especially with P.J. Washington stepping up, that we'll find out if this Minnesota defense is really as good as they think. And that could lead to maybe some less rebounds for Gobert as well if he's stretched out a bit.
Yeah, I'm thinking, too, is Conley still on a fade list? I saw his 3-point prop over 2.5 at plus 140, plus 145. I don't know if I'm Dallas. I'm worried about necessarily containing Mike Conley from the outside. I think maybe, Luka and Kyrie could be used in other spots to help on some of the other guys there. But I also worry about minutes. He was already hurt. And yet he gutted it out in Game 7. I give him that, but he feels like a guy I'm looking to fade as this series moves on. Merril, what about you?
Yeah, he, of course, missed Game 5. He came back, played 31 minutes in Game 6, and then played a 38.5 in Game 7. So the rest should help him a little bit, but it's not a ton of rest. Once again, they're coming off altitude, which you have to be worried about. But he shot incredibly well, actually, from 3-point range when returning. He was 3 for 6 and then 3 for 5. So he was 6 for 11 from 3-point range. He was 0 for 5 from 2-point range in that 7th game. And he was only 2 for 3 from 3. So he actually shot better from 3 than down low, which tells me he's not healthy, that he's not able to drive to the hoop and score otherwise. So I think that's an excellent point, Joe, is that, even despite shooting 6 for 11 from 3-point range, he still ended up with only 13 and 10 points each game. He can't shoot any better than that. A Conley under might be worth a look in this one.
I was diving into another guy that we've heard a lot about because of the injury there to Kleber and company is Derek Lively. He's got a couple of interesting. He's getting way more minutes, right? I believe 6.5 was his prop for rebounds and assists here today, Merrill, which he has gone over in 8 of the 12 playoff games that he has been in. Increased minutes for this kid here. Is there an angle we should look at in backing him on the boards, maybe in the assist market? He's averaging about 22 to 25 minutes a game here, which means he can rack up some stats.
It's an excellent point about props. Some of these under the radar guys, it all depends on shot attempts and minutes, because when you're only playing 15, 20 minutes a game, if you get any kind of increase, even of 5 minutes, that's a 20% increase. If you get a couple more shots because somebody is out, that's a 20% increase. And there's not much wiggle room when your points scored is over under is 7.5 to the under. And if you look at his last 3 games, 12, 11, 7, 12. So he's had 11 or more in 3 of the last 4. The one he missed was by half a point. And it's not a shock because he only had 2 points in games 1 and 2. So they are playing him more. It's something that takes a while for the odds makers to adjust to. If you look at the pure minutes, he's in the high 20s now, and the shot attempts are up as well. He's had 6 shot attempts or more in 4 of his last 5 games. He'd had exactly 3 in the 2 games before that each time. So, yeah, I think Lively over 7.5 points still makes sense. Now, if Kleber returns, like you said, he might in a few games, then that's a great time to pivot and start playing Lively under props, because it'll take the market time to just going the other way also.
Yeah, big question in the chat room is, any idea, Merrill, on which Kyrie shows up tonight? The facilitator Kyrie, or the just give me the damn ball, let me carry this for a while Kyrie?
I mean, your guess would have to be it's the facilitator, right? Because he's constantly been going under his player prop, his points prop in the playoffs. And they've won both series in 6, including an upset, series win against OKC. He got to 22 points. It's at 22 tonight. He had 12 and 9 the 2 before that. He had 22, 9, and 20. So he didn't get over 22 in any of the 6 games against OKC. And this is currently anywhere from 21.5 to 22.5. So let's just say 22 is the consensus number. So you're asking a guy to get over 22 when he didn't do it in any of the last 6 playoff games against OKC. He did do it 2 of the 3 previous against the Clippers, but the fact they played so well against Oklahoma City, why change anything? And they've got multiple scoring options. So, yeah, I think Kyrie will play well. I think he'd get to the low 20s, but once again, he's got to get to about 22, 23 just to win. He didn't do that once in the last series. With that said, though, we could always look at assists. We could look at point rebounds and assists. He's not a big rebounder, but I do think the assist prop might be worth a look. So I prefer Kyrie's assist over. That's priced around 4.5. He had only 3 and 4 the last 2 games, but he had 9, 7, and 11 the 3 games before that. So I think the assist prop over 4.5 is probably a safer option.
Yeah, not a bad look there. Also, I believe it certainly isn't Scott Foster tonight. Kevin Scott, Mark Davis, Mark Lindsay are your 3 scheduled refs here tonight to call it on the court, because that's going to be interesting too. Not as many whistles, certainly, for Indiana last night as there were for Dallas, but unfortunately, that's going to play a role in this too, isn't it? Right? Are the whistles being swallowed, or are we banging around? A lot of that is going to determine, I think, obviously, totals for us, Merrill, here. I'm wondering at this point in the game, are we going to get the ticky-tack? Is this going to be foul trouble for some guys? Makes you wonder what we're going to get here in this series.
Yeah, and it made a big difference in that last series. That's basically why I think Minnesota advanced and Denver didn't. I think when they let it be more of a football game, it benefited the T-Wolves. They're physical. They're a very good defensive team, technically the best defensive team in the NBA efficiency this year. But then again, those 3 middle games that they lost, they gave up over 54% shooting each of those 3 games to Denver. So it really does depend on how the ebb and flow of the game goes. And yet another reason, maybe we wait and take an in-game bet. Let's see if they're calling it. Let's see how they're calling it. We got plenty of time to adjust. If they're letting them play rough and physical, that favors the under, and it definitely favors Minnesota, and you could play an in-game based on that.
Kelsey is saying there's something to do with some sort of cornhole and Kyrie. I don't want to really go back into that thread and see what the hell they're talking about over there. But I do want to send a shout out to Rich C in the house. He is all over the under on Gobert points here tonight. Big Daddy, and that's why I looked it up there, Big Daddy. Mark Davis has been pretty damn profitable to the Dogs in games he has been out on the court here. Mavericks getting, are you still seeing 4 or 4? I'm still seeing 4.5s here with some 4s. Where do you think this lands by the time tip-off comes here?
Yeah, it's 4.5 across the board. If you look at the WagerTalk live odds screen, you'll see the circa is 4 minus 15. So there is a straggling 4 juice, but I think it's going to land 4.5. I mean, maybe we see a little bit of buyback like we've seen on the over-under because the sharp money was on the T-Wolves in the over early. But by the way, as we're doing this show live here around 4:50 Eastern right now on Wednesday afternoon, we were saying 207 all show. It's up to 207.5, and the circa is now 208. Which is another, sharper leading indicator book. So over-under has been jumping around. I don't quite get what's going on there unless there's some player injury information that's, trending on Twitter or something, because I'm not seeing anything.
No, I am not. You starting to see what? The over money come back in, Merrill? Is that where
it's 207.5 now at the leading indicator books, and circa just hit 208, which is pretty substantial. It was 207 30 minutes ago.
That is that's kind of crazy, and it's continuing to move here. And I believe was it Lou 72? Also a great point. Dallas 75% at the line, Minnesota 77. So that's going to be interesting to see how that plays out in this series. Obviously, because both teams, physicality wise, I do think Luka looks healthy. I thought he looked healthier in the last couple of games than he did early here. I think the extra rest is going to help him. I don't see any reason why Luka would be hampered necessarily in this series. And how much does experience playing it for you? Obviously, Kyrie and Luka have been to Western Conference Finals or Conference Finals before, for sure. But what about Minnesota here? What are you looking to see from this young team with not a whole lot of experience to this point?
Well, that was the big question for Oklahoma City and Minnesota coming in. I mean, on paper, they have superstars. They have good defense. They were as good as anybody in the tough West this year. But those were my concerns with both squads. And I do think the experience factor hurt Oklahoma City. I thought the coaching decisions were questionable at times. And let's keep in mind, if Dallas could have shot free throws somewhat normal, they would have won that series 5-1. They blew that game 4 because of free throw shooting. It's also hard to say Minnesota has got an lack of experience after they just went in and beat Denver 3 out of 4 games on the road against the defending world champs. Now, as you said at the top, Joe, they were built to beat Denver, though. So I'm not going to totally say the inexperience issue is gone there. But I think it's probably less of a factor in this series than it was in the previous one. But you're right about the free throw shooting. Minnesota about 3 points better percentage-wise from the line. And that definitely hurt Dallas in game 4 last round. I'm not sure they can afford to give away a game once again like they did in the quarterfinals or the semifinals of the West against probably a better Minnesota team. So we will keep an eye on the free throw shooting, but that is one of the weaker spots for Dallas so far this season.
Cheshire Cat's yelling at me here. Was it simply because I said Dallas is winning one of the first 2 games? I know you have a Minnesota ticket in your pocket, which is why hedging is a wonderful thing in the game here. I'm just saying, I know all over the Wolves here, and I think that is fantastic. But Dallas is winning one of these first 2 games, so just pick one, and you'll get it. You'll figure out where it's going to unfold from there. Depth-wise, bench-wise, Merrill, you give Minnesota. I would see. To me, I think Kleber's an interesting spot. If he gets back at home for game 3. I don't know that the Timberwolves have all of a sudden, the depth is better for Minnesota than it is for Dallas in this one.
Yeah, Kleber's a guy I was worried about when he was out last series, and obviously it didn't end up hurting them. They, like I said, very well could have won 5 of the 6 games. They ended up going 4-2. But if he returns, you do worry if it disrupts the lineup a little bit. I'm always hesitant when a guy's played only 6 of the 12 playoff games. He comes back when things are going well. So we really need to see how these games play out. If they lose both games in Minnesota, it's probably a positive to get them back. If they win one or win both, I'm not sure I'd mess with it. As far as depth, I'm just looking at the 12 playoff games for Dallas rather. Luka and Irving averaging over 40 minutes a game. Washington's about 35. Jones is at 30. And then everybody else, Lively and company and Gafford, 21 or less. So they've only got 4 guys playing more than 21 minutes a game. whereas Minnesota's got 5 guys averaging over 32 minutes a game, 6 guys averaging over 27. So I do think Dallas has better depth already, and that's without Kleber, one of their star backups, not in the lineup. So if he comes back, the depth edge is going to definitely be Dallas. Free throw edge is Minnesota.
Yeah, it's free throw edge is Minnesota. What about which offense do you trust more here, Merril, in this series? Because a lot is being made of Minnesota defensively, but we watched them lose 3 straight games in a row where the offense lost them the games because they didn't have any, and it disappears for long stretches. This is part of the reason why I think this series is going to be so tight here, 6 or 7 games, because I mean, we make fun of Kyrie, like which Kyrie shows up, which offense shows up for Minnesota. And it's not like Dallas hasn't been playing top 5 defense either since the trade deadline. They have absolutely been locked down here, this team defensively. So you got a Minnesota team that struggles to score against a top 5 defense now. But are we sure what we're going to get from Minnesota offensively?
Yeah, so overall, for the playoffs, surprisingly, Minnesota is still, if you look at offensive efficiency for the playoff games only, they're 6th, Dallas is 7th. And if you look at defensive for the playoffs only, Minnesota's 4th, Dallas is 6th. So Minnesota is actually ahead of them still for the playoffs. Now, it's a little misleading because they had New Orleans in the first round. Dallas had a tougher opponent, in my opinion, against the Clippers. Right. But then if you look at the overall numbers for the season, in Minnesota, as I've said, number 1 defense in the NBA, Boston 2nd on efficiency. Dallas is way down that list at 18th, but that's misleading because they played a lot better after the All-Star break with the personnel change. For the season, though, Dallas ranked 8th on offensive efficiency. Minnesota was 17th. So I do think Dallas has the better offense, the more efficient, more consistent offense. Minnesota has been the better defense this year, but I think that gap has been closing recently. And it's going to really come down to if the Minnesota defense plays as the number 1 defense in the NBA. Because when the 3 games they lost, as I said, against Denver, they did not. They allowed them to shoot over 54% 3 straight games. And in fact, if you look at the defensive numbers since the All-Star break, Minnesota falls to 3rd and Dallas is up to 13th. So Minnesota is the better D. But since the All-Star break on offense, Dallas still 7th, Minnesota still 17th. So nothing's changed in that regard. But Dallas's defense has gotten much better the last few months.
Yeah, Dallas also allowing just 42 points in the paint this postseason. They have locked it up in and around the rim, which has always been a specialty of Minnesota here. So, you know, with Gobert and Karl Anthony Towns, which again is why Kleber is going to be so interesting. Bringing Gobert out to the 3-point line could be a very dangerous situation here for the Minnesota Timberwolves if they can get him back. But then it comes down to coaching. A lot of people saying best job they've seen, you know, Jason Kidd from a coaching perspective, X's and O's situation. This is by far the best job he has done in his career. You know, Finch has actually been pretty good pulling the right strings from Minnesota, too. So push comes to shove, Merril. Who you giving the coaching edge to in this series?
Yeah, I think it's probably a non-factor, although, you know, I was concerned about Minnesota and Oklahoma City's inexperience, and I thought Oklahoma City was definitely outcoached in the series against Dallas. So I guess you could say maybe an edge to Dallas in that regard. But once again, Minnesota just went in and beat the defending world champs 3 out of 4 times in Denver. So I think it's pretty neutral here overall. And I think the players are going to probably decide this on the court. One thing I'll say about Irving, though, we talk about how he's not getting over his point prop, but they've won both series in 6. That's a real positive, in my opinion. That just shows how balanced Dallas is. And there's still like upside for one of the best players in the NBA to be very mediocre and you're still winning. Can you imagine if he turns it on all of a sudden, how dangerous they're going to be? Whereas Minnesota really does seem to kind of live and die by what Anthony Edwards does.
Yeah, I think that's going to be interesting. All right, Kelsey has now switched from the shorts chat room to the horizontal YouTube channel there, our main channel, and she is just basically throwing bombs left and right. She wants to know if you dream numbers, Merril, when you take a nap. Is it just like some people count sheep? Is it integers for you? Like, what are you counting? Fractions? How does it work there?
This is a true story. Like, dreams fascinate me, and I wish I could video and record all the dreams. Like, my theory is that you always remember the one you wake up from, right? You don't remember the other 5 hours worth of dreams or whatever. But this is And by the way, yes, to the short answer is yes, Kelsey. I was even thinking about baseball games. I was talking about a wager talk today when I took a little nap in between waking up this morning and doing the show. But this is the best dream of all time. It was about 15 years ago. It was in early March. NCAA tournament's about to start. I'm in full throttle mode. I had a dream, and once again, dreams are weird and they're hard to remember. But basically, in a nutshell, the NCAA bracket was like the Matrix, and I was trapped in the NCAA bracket, and I couldn't get out. And all I remember is I couldn't get by Ball State. Ball State was the big roadblock for me, but I still vividly remember this. It was like a Matrix-style weird universe, and I was trapped in the NCAA bracket. So if that doesn't answer your question, I don't know what does. That's a true story.
Yeah. Listen, when Kelsey, when Merrill is trapped in a corner by Ball State, you might be onto something there. The man is absolutely Rain Man in a lot of ways there. I'm just going to hit. You should see him at the blackjack table, too, by the way, guys. It's quite interesting there. So Steve likes Mavericks to win. I don't know, Finesse Kid, that's what we pulled out of the conversation here today. But Merrill, if you were picking a side here, are you leaning one way or the other, or what would be your one look here in this series of this game?
Yeah, I was reading the comments on my daily video, and one guy was extremely upset because it said picks and predictions, and I didn't give a definite pick on the game, even though I gave like 6 player props at the end and gave some other stuff. But no, I was very neutral on the side when I did my video, and I'm kind of neutral now. But the more you and I have talked here on the show, Joe, I think the value is with Dallas. If I'm really neutral in the game, if I think it's a toss-up, I probably should be taking the 4.5. And I do agree that the situation probably doesn't favor Minnesota off the game 7. It's off the altitude game 7. My hedge there is that they're back at home, but Dallas has been really good. And I think Dallas remains underrated with the lineup addition since February. So I'm talking myself into a Dallas plus 4.5 lean. So I guess Steve would be, or actually he was saying Steve. I thought his name was Steve also, but he would be correct. I'm probably leaning that way. You've talked me into it, Joe Ranieri. I like the over 5.5 for the series better though. That's something I had not talked about. I like that better.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, it certainly wasn't cheap, but if you're gonna lean Dallas, I saw the Mavs in 6 at a plus 5-1. I saw Dallas in 7 at plus 750, 760, somewhere in that ballpark. So I think the value, Merrill, doesn't mean they're gonna win. I just think the value here is with Dallas in a long series, 6 or 7 games here. I just don't see this thing ending in 5. So if you're jumping in on Dallas now, then you probably think Dallas wins tonight, right, Merrill? Otherwise, if you think Minnesota wins, but you're leaning Dallas, just wait until they lose tonight. You'll get a much better number tomorrow.
Yeah, that's the tricky thing, right? As a 4.5-point dog, they should lose, and their plus 160 series are going to be over 200 if they lose like they should. The problem is that they don't lose, which is possible. 30-some% chance they win straight up tonight, then it's going to they might be pick 'em minus money even going into game 2 for the series. I will point this out too. I like the game 6 odds. What was it? 5-1, probably better than the 7-1 for game 7. I know we just saw both Indiana and Minnesota go win game 7s on the road, but as you know, Joe, it's about a 20-some% play long-term that game 7 road teams win straight up. With that said, though, Minnesota's shown some weakness at home. They were actually better at Denver. And Dallas has been very good on the road. So I don't read too much into that. But, yeah, I think this series could go either way. I'm really neutral on the series. I'm kind of neutral on tonight's game. But if that's the case, you probably take the plus money.
Yeah, I just don't see how I just don't see how this many points for just the situation alone is just a tough one here for Minnesota tonight. And over the last decade, we know the numbers aren't fantastic for teams like Minnesota. Now, game 1 at home as a favorite. And they haven't been a great favorite here recently anyway. So this is going to be an interesting one here tonight. How about Merrill moving forward? Are we still under the assumption? Because Boston threw us all for a loop. They won game 1 by the skin of their teeth, which means we may not go through one of those game 2s, sleepwalking situation where all of a sudden it's 1-1 where they lose game 2 at home. They're obviously very aware of it. I heard three different guys be asked that question in the post-game interviews, Merril. They're Brown, Tatum. They're asking her, so what is that? Are you going to lose game two? Like, everybody knows they lose game two at home, but maybe and usually that's after blowout wins in game one. So overtime last night, was that maybe a wake-up call for Boston moving forward?
Exactly right, Joe. It's not about game twos. It's about Boston not being focused. And I thought Boston would be focused last night, but it didn't shock me maybe that they weren't because, once again, they thought Indiana had just come off 7 games. Indiana's the inferior team. Now, granted, Boston had 2 13-point leads, once in the first half, once in the second half. So it's not like they played awful, but they still kind of sleptwalk. That's why I thought at -1.5 overtime line, that was a great bet. They won by 5. They were up by 7. But I don't think I think that still was basically like a loss because it wasn't a convincing win. And they were lucky to get to OT. They asked Brown in the post game on the court, they go, explain that play to us. He goes, well, we drew it up. We ran it. We executed exactly like we wanted. I'm like, whatever. You basically took a 3-pointer in the corner over your shoulder with the defender's hand in your face and made the shot. I mean, it was a lucky shot, and they probably were lucky to even win the game straight up. So win or lose, I think the same result is that Boston will be focused on Thursday night, and you don't want, just like you don't want to fade superstars in the prop market, you don't want to fade the best team in the NBA when they're focused. And I think also you can make an argument that one got away from Indiana. That was their game to lose there at the end of regulation. Would not be surprised to see a very different result in this game too.
Yeah, me neither. And I think just the mood of the team last night was, what the hell just happened here? Did we almost lose game one at home to a team that we're supposed to absolutely crush? So I do think it's interesting. The early line on that, Merril, too, still 9. It pretty much what we had in game one. Is that what you're seeing?
No, that's the thing, Joe. It's less than what we had in game one. It opened 9.5 game one, went up to 10.5 by tip-off. And now this one opened 8.5, and it's up to 9. So it's an excellent point because I think the situation's probably better now. Yes, they're coming off a win, and they've been complacent in game twos off a win, but the other 2 wins are blowouts. Like you said, they have to take Indiana serious now. So I think it's pretty interesting that the betting market is saying that the situation is now better for Indiana when I'm not so sure that's the case.
Yeah, I'm not buying it either. I'll tell you what, still a better situation than the Pistons in 5. AOD in the house here tonight, still looking to back those Pistons in 5. Lore Farquaad. I understand earlier today in first pitch, there was a bid Lord Farquaad. I think Dan just likes saying Farquaad there. I'm pretty sure he calls everybody that now here at WagerTalk. I think he was all over that, including Embiid. He even calls Lord Farquaad now. But pleasure to see you here, Lord. Julio in the house there, Big Daddy. Pacers are not getting blown out tomorrow. Another close game. Kelsey is on her 3rd bottle of wine. Always a pleasure to see you, Kelsey. And shout out to Grind at All Times. You know what he called it for? He called it for bourbon time. He said it is now bourbon time, and you are damn right, Grind at All Times. Let's get it going here. Merril, what do you got locked, loaded, ready to go here today at WagerTalk.com?
Yeah, I've got a strong play on the total. I mentioned I was kind of neutral on the side, but I do have a strong client best bet on the over-under tonight. Check that out. I'm number 1 all-time in the history of WagerTalk.com, the most units won in the NBA. So check out my strong best bet tonight for game 1. While you're there, get the baseball best bet 2-for-1 combo for just $29, or get them both for free when you sign up for June or the summer special. We have a 1-month and a 3-month special, which gets you June, or you can get June, July, and August. No matter which option you choose, no promo code needed. And you get the rest of May, including both best bets tonight in the next week plus, for free when you sign up for one of those 2 summer specials. Steve Merril, WagerTalk.com. And by the way, I know many of you already have my playoff package. If you want to get the baseball, contact customer support. They will give you an additional $50 discount off a 1-month baseball, or drop a question below here in the comments. I'll give you the promo code right in the comments below for all of you basketball clients if you want to add baseball. So no matter which option you choose, don't miss some strong best bets tonight. And, a bonus free play the Mariners-Yankees game on my page as well. Steve Merril, WagerTalk.com.
John, divide it, don't hide it. Finley just wants a quick shot of Merrill's cousin, if we could, Dan. Yeah, if we could throw it up there. There it is. There it is. Alive
They
and
got
well.
odds on where he'll be next year. I saw this yesterday, and I thought of you guys. Every time I see Giddy now, I think of Joe and Dan. By the way, my cousin is JJ Redick. I found this for Dan Alexander. This is February of 2019.
Look at that. Oh,
Jimmy
my
Butler.
goodness.
Look, this is Joe Ranieri and Dan Alexander right there. Embiid and Butler. February of 19. But they have odds right now at one of the offshore books on where Giddy will be next year. If he doesn't remain with OKC, it's a push. Plus 450. Not my Washington Wizards. Oh, he's getting closer to home, the odds say.
No.
So people are going to start to think that is me if he ends up with the Wizards.
I got to tell you, it's...
Why is Merrill never on NBA tip-off when the Wizards are playing a home game?
Brother from a different mother. I'm telling you, brother from a different mother. Lou72, Shenron Sports, we appreciate you as always, guys. AOD says no Giddy. No Giddy here tonight. Definitely no Giddy here tonight. Cheshire Cat, don't worry. It's going to be a long series. You'll have plenty to sweat out here. Go Wolves. But not tonight here. And by the way, I keep seeing this number move. It's down. It was 52.5. It's now 51.5. The Dallas Mavericks first half team total. 51.5. Just throwing that out there. Do what you want with that. 51.5 here. Oh, and wait a minute. What time is it, Merrill? It is now officially 5:13, and S. Warrior is now in the chat room. Well done, S. Warrior. You're way over the total there. We appreciate you.
He's trying to miss it.
Absolutely. Even Steve was amazed that S. Warrior finally showed up. Look at that. That was when he found
Giddy.
out
That's
you were
Giddy.
here.
That's not Steve.
Unbelievable.
That's Giddy. Josh Giddy's
there it is. Unbelievable.
Fantastic.
Always a pleasure, S. Warrior, to see you for the last 30 seconds. It truly is, man. Outstanding stuff as always.
Smash that like button while you're there.
That's right.
Smash
hit the like button. Yes, hit the like button. Hit the bourbon button. Grind at all times on Instagram. We appreciate you guys as always. Kelsey, you are a sick SOB, but you know that already. So we appreciate you all, Big Daddy. Always a pleasure. Life in Vegas. Giddy up. That's the way to do it. AOD, Pistons in 5. Appreciate all you guys. Again, come back and join us again tomorrow. A lot to discuss here, obviously, over the next couple of days, given the fact that all of a sudden there are some question marks regarding the Boston Celtics and the Indiana Pacers. I think we're going to learn a little something here tonight. Come back and join us again tomorrow. We'll break it all down, find some edges, and cash a few tickets. Until then, guys, best of luck with the plays tonight. Cheers. We'll see you again tomorrow.